first starting with like what is the COP? What is like it's short for Conference of Parties. It's like very general, but it strictly refers to the Conference of the Parties for the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is like the COP for the UNFCCC, which is usually how it's being communicated. And it's basically the signatories, the countries that agreed that to solve the crisis, the international global crisis of climate change. And they meet every year to discuss solutions and ways forward, and also the mechanisms on how the world should be tackling climate change. It's a very important platform for discussion, for multilateralism on climate politics, and it's every year it's growing in popularity. Now, the last COP29, there was 66,000 people registered to attend, and which happened in Baku in Azerbaijan. The one before it, there was around, I believe, in the 80s, like 80 something thousand people registered in Dubai. That was COP28, which is really massive numbers of people to attend these conferences. Of course, many people think it's too big, becoming too big to serve its function, to be practical. But this is a very important signal that the climate change is becoming a very important topic, not only between the parties, which are the governments, but also in other type of involvement of actors, academia, private sector, civil society, and others. Among these 66,000, or let's say that happened this year, not all of them are in negotiations. So I would say from the participants, maybe 30% really or less involved in these negotiations. The rest, it's for the rest, it's almost like any other conference. It's people who meet, who create connections. They have events, they discuss. So these in like closed rooms happens. There are representatives from either countries or regions that come together to have one voice. For example, like island states, for example, like the Africa groups, they come together, they have one voice to communicate their common interests, and then they try to negotiate what is best on an international level, but also on for their priorities. Of course, always there's always a divide between developed nations and like developing nations, as this is the terms used in negotiations. And the developing nations usually require for like more finance. It needs more finance, more care or attention to climate adaptation, while developed nations not so keen. Let's say they are like active in trying to mobilize finance, but not so keen to give it, to mobilize it. And also they're more focused on mitigation as a priority. So these the interests of global interests are colliding, and people trying to reach a common ground, which is usually where it's really difficult to reach, and sometimes it could make or break each COP. This year, it was marked as the Finance COP. So it was all about financing. And that was one of the, what everyone was expecting, to reach an agreement on what we call the new quantified goal on finance. So the idea, or like the developing nations were trying to push for $1.3 trillion annual climate finance by 2035. And this of course haven't been met. So that's why a lot of people were disappointed. The agreement at the end was $300 billion to be from developed nations, and the rest is to be mobilized in other means and tools. So this means a lot of people were very frustrated and disappointed in that final result. So it was all about finance, and that was the result. So many people would still think it's a disappointment. I do think for a lot of other people, it's a way forward. So this is what is important for many other people. It's a way forward. This is a big improvement from the last goal of $100 billion annually that was agreed until 2025. So this was the current goal that hasn't really been effectively met yet. So trying to raise ambition to 2035. $300 billion as a minimum is an improvement, of course, but still very far off what we actually need for, for the 1.5 degree pathway, or even the 2 degree pathways. So still we're far off to addressing needs of climate adaptation, the needs of the developing nations as well.